Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maggie Vandenberg with the IQ Business Group. I'm happy to be your moderator for today's webinar, The Stormy Relationship Between Compliance and Productivity. I'm joined today by Brian Britton, Vice President of Delivery from Mint, and Jay Hall, Channel Solution Engineer from AvePoint. We are proud to sponsor today's webinar to support our public and private sector folks, including Fed, SLED, and our private sector friends seeking knowledge and insight for leveraging Microsoft 365 to improve compliance while also increasing productivity. For folks who have joined us before, thanks for joining us again. And for those we haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, welcome. IQBG is a leading provider of records and information management solutions for the public sector and highly regulated industries. Since 2008, the IQ Business Group has been developing ECRM and content services solutions for highly regulated industries, including public and private sectors, that leverage people, process, and technology to support your requirements.
Hey everyone, welcome and thank you, Maggie. As Maggie said, my name is Ryan Britton and I work for an organization called the Mint Group, which is a global Microsoft partner with a plethora of gold certifications across the Microsoft value portfolio, working in multiple territories with several awards under our belt. And we're very pleased to have an exciting topic that has to do with some friction that we often see in our consulting.
Hello everyone, my name is Jay Hall and I am a Channel Solutions Engineer here at AvePoint. I'm going to be on this call with Ryan together talking about the topics of how we can better manage our information and data, but ensuring that this is going to be something that can be done from a proper perspective. AvePoint has been doing this for a little over 20 years. We are an expert in Microsoft software, specifically as it pertains to M365. We've been a management, migration, and protection data suite solution, and we're here to support Mint Group on this journey.
Fantastic. So these webinars come from experience that Mint, IQ, and AvePoint share in delivering a set of consulting offerings called Smart Compliance, basically built on top of AvePoint products with the expertise of the IQ Business Group and Mint providing the consulting on top of that. And I think you could flip to the next slide, Maggie, apologies. And essentially what Smart Compliance is a methodology that we've built up over a number of years for delivering information, governance, and compliance solutions on top of Microsoft 365 for organizations that are looking to move to the cloud or have existing presence in the cloud. And essentially there is a lot that goes into managing information in this day and age, as well you can imagine, I'm sure. And essentially we have an approach that we use in order to go from switching the lights on in a Microsoft 365 tenant to being in a place where you have that level of good attestation for compliance, you have good governance, your teams are well managed from a lifecycle perspective, your documents are classified, and all of the parallel effort that goes into putting together a really world-class information ecosystem.
So to start things off, we have a poll for everybody that is going to be going up on your screens now. So go ahead and look at that and tell us what y'all think. Okay, with most people having voted, we have 17% of people saying that their biggest concern is maintaining compliance with regulatory bodies. Another 17% saying that their biggest focus is maintaining a high level of productivity and efficiency. 50% say that their goal is a balance between compliance and productivity, and another 17% say they need high compliance and high productivity.
Yeah, very interesting question. Okay, so to set the scene, Very exciting topic today, Jay, don't you think? Compliance versus productivity. And I think where this comes from is that often as we talk to customers, as we're looking at how to apply information solutions to their existing ecosystems, we find that there is a friction between these two concepts. Folks are normally say, compliance, yes, we get it, new world we live in, lots of regulatory bodies that you have to stay compliant to. We see in the media that there's a lot of fines for organizations that fall outside of compliance, even in the private sector, where we're talking about managing privacy effectively and being due diligent with folks' data. And we would love to invest money into that, but, can we really afford to take a knock to our productivity, to become unable to innovate as an organization or to be agile to the market? All of these types of things. I don't know if you find the same thing in your journeys.
Yeah, Ryan, that's a great point. Honestly, I think even from our own experiences as an organization, the reality is that these topics don't just talk about information as well. They're also talking about the onboarding processes, right? Being able to bring in new colleagues who are actually going to work with you. It introduces complexities as you try to remain compliant with some of those regulatory bodies that are out there.
Exactly. And they are competing concepts here, right? If you're talking about compliance, your main aim is to try and reduce risk. And the process of reducing risks usually means that you need to slow things down. You need to be careful in the way that you handle information. Whereas productivity, folks are like, well, if we're looking at reducing risk and we're slowing things down, we may not be able to capture the business value. We may be so worried about the process. Likewise, from a compliance perspective, we want a controlled life cycle. We want to know how documents are created, how they're evolved, how they're shared, where they end up, how we can pull them into a retention cycle and eventual disposition. Where from a productivity perspective, folks are saying, well, we want easy collaboration. We don't want this controlled life cycle. We want to be able to share the document, co-author, rapidly evolve content, and essentially be as productive and efficient as possible in driving our business goals. And where compliance might say, we're about policy enforcement. Here are the rules, you have to follow the rules. Productivity is more about, well, let's relax the rules so that we can get things out more rapidly, so we can share more easily these types of conversations. And compliance is most easily done if you have centralized control. This is why in the past, I think we've seen a lot of kind of records management systems and these types of systems where, the collaboration happens somewhere else. And when you guys are serious about controlling the document, pass it into the record system and we'll handle the information the way information should be handled. And on the flip side, the productivity space, folks are saying, well, we want to be able to create workspaces, we want to be able to chat, we want to be able to collaborate, we want to be able to unlock the creativity that is necessary in order to be our best selves in producing good content. And so this really does seem like two opposite ends of a spectrum at competition with one another, I would say. And so in the interest of continuing to set the scene, let's talk about why compliance is important. It's important, I think, because of the risk of litigation. Folks are reaching a point now where they have legal recourse against folks who mismanage their information. And there are state legislatures, and there are federal rules, and there are global rules, and there are a whole bunch of things that tell us how we need to manage our information. And we may be at risk of accruing liability because we're mismanaging it. And then there are industry regulators who in specific industries or sectors have an expectation that certain rules are followed in terms of the way that information is managed, retained, disposed of, etc. There is the big topic of information privacy that is a buzz in the media, and we see that consumers are expecting that privacy is maintained for their information, but it goes beyond consumer-based privacy. It has to do with customer privacy. It has to do with partner privacy. It has to do with employee privacy. And obviously data security leads on from that and being able to protect the information. There is records management, and if you have a record schedule, how compliant are you against what you say you are doing with information? If you are destroying information you should be retaining, or retaining information you should be destroying, that also represents a liability. And finally, for folks who have an organically grown and perhaps difficult to organically structured information repository, the process of doing e-discovery can be quite cumbersome in terms of mining that information to meet the expectations of holds and those types of things that are lodged with an organization. And if we flip the coin then, next slide please, Maggie. Why is productivity important? Well, we don't want admin overhead. Admin overhead doesn't make our citizens' lives better. It doesn't make our customers' lives better. We want to reduce the amount of admin that we have. We want market agility. As the market changes, and it does so quite rapidly these days, we want to be able to change with it. We want workflow efficiency. We don't want to be bogged down classifying documents and trying to stay organized when we want to move a workflow forward as quickly as possible. Ultimately, time is money. The longer we take to do things, the more money it costs us, the more cumbersome that process is, the less opportunity there is to bring value to a certain situation. Successful collaboration is important to productivity nowadays, especially post-pandemic, and hybrid work has become so front and center. Folks feel that it is necessary to collaborate in order to do their jobs, and need to be able to do that in an easy, efficient, and productive manner. And the employee mentality is that I want to go the shortest route between A and B. Now, we've worked with a lot of customers who have tried to organize their information ecosystems in a due diligent way, I suppose, and have been let down, because if you're expecting that your employees are going to classify their documents and follow cumbersome workflows, they're not going to do it. They're going to go the shortest route between A and B in order to get the job done, and that's a reality.
And Ryan, I think this is kind of an interesting point, right? Because you mentioned earlier how the productivity versus compliance is oftentimes a versus mentality, right? But even just talking about some of the points that you just mentioned here, if you really think about it, even if we take compliance, not necessarily from an industry perspective, right? And we just talk about it from an internal perspective, right? Just making sure that we have certain operation protocols that we follow. That organizational structure can actually help with productivity. So while the initial overhead might be a bit extreme or a bit excessive, the reality is the time it will save you over time can actually make you a lot more efficient and a lot more productive.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, so what is required for a compliant and governable workspace? ECRM technology, infrastructure and tools, a good governance structure, policies and procedures, guidelines for process standardization, information classification and retention management, inventories of information assets, training, monitoring, reporting, a list of things that I think that we know we should be doing, and that if you asked any person who's in the IT department or in the records management department, or is a compliance officer, or even folks who are in business units and expediting a certain task on a day-to-day basis, we all know that these are the things that we should be doing, things that take investment in order to put in place. Okay, and then what is required for a productive workplace? And I see we've duplicated the previous slide here, so I'll just talk through a few items here that are required for productive workspace. What we want is the shortest path from A to B. We want the ability to set up teams fluidly and easily, without waiting for an IT person to turn that around over a period of weeks. We want to be able to get the information that we need to make business decisions. We want to be able to create documents and share them externally with other organizations, partners, customers, etc., without having blockers that stop that from happening. And that can be quite a tough thing to get right. We also want workflows that work with us rather than against us. And ultimately, the less friction there is in expediting the work that we have to do as part of our role, the better employee satisfaction we're going to have. And ultimately, that's what we require out of a productive workplace.
Okay, and I've got another poll for everybody. After hearing the first bit of our presentation, have you changed your mind about where your priorities are? That poll will be up on your screens now, so go ahead and think about that a little bit for us. Okay, so with most people having voted, 14% say no, maintaining high compliance is still a top priority. Another 14% say nope, the productivity is still the most important thing for them. 14% say they still need a balance. 43% say no, they still think compliance and productivity is achievable. And 14% say yes, they have changed their minds.
Very interesting. Okay, and so to further complicate the poll questions, let's talk about how we measure high productivity to really understand what it is that we're talking about here. I think there are three things that really break down good productivity. It has to do with how many tasks you're completing, okay, on a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis, whatever makes sense, the quantity, how much effort is wasted, the efficiency, and then how much of that work that you're now producing, hopefully at this high rate and high efficiency, is of high quality. And I think that real productivity is a place where there is high efficiency, high quantity of work, and high quality of work. And I think the process of doing that is really what we're looking for when we talk about having a productive business unit, a productive work day, a productive employee, a productive work life.
Yeah, and honestly, Ryan, this is something that I've seen, not only customers and partners of ours struggle with, but even internally as an organization, right? The reality is that there are a lot of systems in place, there are a lot of mechanisms that we have, a lot of protocols that were good and easy to leverage and utilize initially in order to get things done. But it becomes a real challenge when we start to evolve and we have to make sure that those protocols, those policies, those procedures, even the software that we leverage is not only helping us get the job done, but doing it in such a manner that it is most logical and efficient. Because no matter who you are, if you get something done, but it takes you 2 to 3 times as long as you're supposed to do it, then that's not really useful, right? Because we still have to, like you said, make money. And as we know, time is money.
Yeah, exactly. And being productive can be rewarding, right? And you're right, it is challenging, not just internally, not just with our customers, but I live and breathe this stuff, and I find this challenging every day. So let's look at some of the facts around things that might make you non-productive. Some interesting facts that we dug up. On average, 1.5 hours a day is spent correcting information errors, according to Zapier. Okay, so that's a pretty high number. That's more than you would have expected to see. Process automation can help, okay, yes, but it requires standardization and engineering. And this is a conversation that we often have with folks where they say, we've seen this RPA stuff, we've seen information automation, automated approvals, we want that stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations struggle to get there. So in order to really get to a place where you can automate, you must have the structure in place that can be automated. 60% of company executives felt that time constraints and lack of understanding of where to find information was the biggest blockers to productivity. I'm sure you can agree with that, all the folks on the call here. Quality requires standards, policies to enforce them, and tools to measure the quality. And this is a fact of life. We've often seen that when you put teams under pressure, the quality is the first thing to go. And that quality is so difficult to measure if you don't have the right standards in place, the right policies in place, that it can really affect productivity quite badly. You end up having to go back and redo the work a second time. And that is certainly not the most productive way to go about doing things. And then finally, and maybe most interestingly, 19.8% of the average employee's day is wasted searching for information, according to McKinsey. That's one day out of every week that we are trying to source information, trying to find information, trying to get information from other parts of the business. And that's a lot of wasted efficiency for no reason other than the information is difficult to find and we don't know where it is and we don't know who owns it and we don't know how to get it from them.
Yeah, and Ryan, this really kind of goes back to the point that we're trying to make, right? It's not necessarily always going to be that compliance has to be against productivity, because in order to make things more efficient, you need those policies, those procedures, those protocols. Because losing 20% of your day just looking for information isn't only a burden on yourself, but it can also be a burden on the folks who are relying on that information, right? Whatever the output or the outcome of you gathering those details and then providing it out, that's a measurement that we probably aren't even realizing is going to be impactful, that it trickles down across the business, across the organization, into those that we're collaborating with on a day-to-day basis.
I mean, if you went to any organization and said, if you could halve that number and get a 10% increase in productivity across the board, I don't think there's an organization that would say, no, we don't want that.
Definitely agree. I know my managers would definitely appreciate a 10% increase.
Yeah. Okay, and then to amplify what we've been saying and kind of start to drive this point home, and hopefully you folks are seeing the narrative that we're trying to spin here, some lessons from our grandparents. And we don't want to belabor the point. What we're really saying here is that there's a lot of things that we know in other parts of our life that have to do with housekeeping and running a home and being organized in other parts of your life that ring true when we talk about managing information and really doing any kind of work. Things like, a place for everything in its place. When all else fails, cleaning house is the perfect antidote. I myself find that if I start a day of work and I know that I've got an incredible amount to get through, the first thing I do is clean my desk. Does it help me get all of that work done? No. But the process of doing that and being organized and getting everything into its place and getting going is something that is not only a motivation, but a practice that allows you to be more efficient as you go about doing those tasks, because everything is coming from a place of cleanliness and organization. And I'm not going to go through the rest of them. Really, the points that we're trying to make here is that there's a lot of good lessons that we could learn from the anecdotes that past generations have left us about the importance of being organized. And let's be honest, right? It's not always easy. We don't want to clean our homes. We would much rather not be spending our time going about doing that. And for some folks, you wait a week and then you try and do it, and then it's a complete disaster and you hate it. And if you have a culture where you are continuously cleaning, getting everything into its place, as much as that seems like it's not fun, it enables the spontaneous pieces of your life. And yeah, I probably do sound like one of my grandparents right now, but it really is a truth that I think we've come to appreciate. And a lot of instances where we find ourselves going, well, no, we've got to be productive. We don't want to be organized because that's going to hamper our productivity. I think deep down inside, we really know that being organized and getting our house in order really allows us to live our best lives.
I mean, Ryan, you're so right here, right? At the end of the day, what we're trying to accomplish is simplicity to enable us to be more spontaneous later on, right? We all know that experience of I come home from a long day, I throw my keys on the table, I take my clothes off, I go take a shower, I come back, I eat, and I relax. But when I go to start my next day, what is the first thing I'm looking to do? I need to find my keys again. Not being organized, it's such a burden that people don't often think about, right? We always want to get to the next task, to the next thing. But sometimes taking that extra minute can save us 15 minutes down the line, which can then prevent compounding concerns of Well, now I'm late. So it is really something that it's oftentimes seen as mundane or boring, but it can really help give us time back because that additional 15 minutes I could potentially spend playing a game or maybe sleeping, whatever the case may be. But it starts first with that organization.
Yeah. As someone who has tested the premise of having to search for hours to find your keys in a couch, I can wholeheartedly agree. So the truth of the matter is, as with most things in life, becoming organized requires investment, and staying organized requires vigilance and governance. But if we believe that we can be productive without discipline, organization, and planning, we're fooling ourselves. People who invest in being organized have more opportunity to be spontaneous and find less consequence for it. And so it is with productivity at work. You can hop on over to the next slide, Maggie. Okay, so here's a different way of looking at it. And this is something that we have conversations with customers far more often than you would think. And it seems logical when you see it said like this, right? You have a bunch of information. You can't just get to productivity. You really need to put some things in place first. You need policies and procedures, standards and measurement, structure and classification, security and protection, processes and automation, culture and training. You lay that foundation on top of your information, and what you have is compliance and governance. Those practices make up a large portion of what folks who are looking for compliance. And when we say compliance, it's not just security compliance. We're talking about informational compliance here as well, and governance of your information. You get that. And on top of that, creating productivity, if you can do it in such a way that following those policies and procedures and meeting those standards and measurements are part of a workday, and that it's not an incredibly cumbersome part of that workday. If instead the way that you have structured your environment enables that compliance and governance to come as friction-free as possible without compromising it, then you really unlock some amazing things from a productivity perspective.
Yeah, and I think this is really going to kind of be driven home as we kind of go through some of the additional slides here. But the reality is, everything that we're talking about from an information management perspective, it can be looked at as cumbersome when you look at it as an individual document or at the lowest level. But if we take governance and we take a macro approach to the micro problems, oftentimes you can make it a lot easier and a lot simpler really to start to implement these things, because it becomes daunting when I have to think about each individual task that I have to accomplish. But if I can just start from a top level down, maybe just throwing everything into a bucket, right? That's a start. It's organizing at a high level. And then from there, I start to add maybe different separators and dividers for each individual piece of information I might have. Well, that whole process started from the top down. And now it becomes a lot less daunting, a lot less concerning, because the common themes, the common factors, the common information, it's already organized and grouped into a central location. We just now have to start to split it out and prioritize it. But that all starts somewhere, whether it's the top level or the lower level. And I know we're going to get into that, Ryan, but just kind of wanted to illustrate, how this process can really easily be thought of if you just think about it a different way.
Yeah, you're so right, Jane. And I can sympathize with organizations who have 25 years worth of organically grown information that they're trying to move to the cloud and that they're maintaining on premise, and to tackle that is daunting. But the fact of the matter is that, first of all, what statistics have shown us is that about 12% of an organization's information is business critical. You don't need to get through all the information. You just have to be able to divide the 12% from the rest of it. There may be value in the rest of it, and you certainly don't want to trash the rest of it. But at least if you take the 12% and you start to work with that, start to go business unit by business unit. And this is kind of infringing on some of the future slides that we're going to talk about. But break it down. tackle it. Start to get these pieces in place, as you say, in a segmented, siloed, or micro fashion in parts of the business or parts of the organization. Then that really allows you to start to get a handle on it. One of the unfortunate things that we see quite often is that folks go, well, that's a huge amount of information. We inherently know that there is risk and value in information, but we're going to adopt to keep everything a policy just in case. We back everything up. We protect everything with our costly security and cybersecurity measures. And really, as much as tackling the information is daunting, kicking the can down the road is just going to present the same problem in 5 years' time, except that now you have 25% more information.
Yeah, and that's really the problem when it comes to not just information management as a whole, but also compliance and governance. And this is why it is oftentimes thought of as a productivity versus compliance, rather than how do we implement compliance to become more productive.
Yeah, absolutely true. Okay, so another way of looking at it is that informational maturity is really at a scale. We all want to be in a position, whatever organization we're in, whatever industry we're in, where the information that we provide is insightful. In other words, the information is available, discoverable at critical moments where it can provide value to business decision-making processes. Unfortunately, you can't just start at that top level. We want to have efficiency, which you can see at number 9 towards the top there. But we can't just start at efficiency. Instead, we have to start at the bottom of the scale, and we have to build this up in layers and say, we have to think about, first of all, aggregating all the information we need in order to be informed and enabled to make decisions about how to progress up this maturity scale. We need to make sure that everything that is within our realm of responsibility from an information perspective is connected. We need to make sure that we have protected that environment, that connected environment, in terms of endpoint protection, data loss prevention, all of these wonderful buzzwords that we see. We have to make sure that that ecosystem is then compliant. We have to look at the types of compliances that regulatory bodies are recommending that we use in order to be due diligent in our approach to information management and governance. We need to implement those things. Then we need to make sure that we have continuous access to all of our information. So in other words, backup, archiving, all of those disaster, archiving isn't disaster recovery, but all of those types of things that form an ecosystem of providing continuous access to information at the right time. We want to integrate our systems together. We want to get to a point where everything that we do is data centric. Then we start to get to a place where collaboration starts to be really easy to roll out. Why? Well, because we have information that is compliant. We know what information is where. We have information that is safe because we've put the correct protections in place, and so forth and so on. Then we become agile. Then we become much more efficient, engaged, insightful. And so it is that the scale continues to build on itself as organizations invest in the right level in order to ensure that they reach their vision. And unfortunately, as I said, it's very difficult to say, well, we want to be insightful, but we don't want to invest in any of the other layers below that.
Yeah, and Ryan, the thing I like talking about here is that oftentimes there are two different kinds of folks when you think about how we perceive things, right? The folks who see the forest and the folks who see the tree. Oftentimes, it really depends on where you are in your level of maturity for information management that will determine what's the best approach, right? Because starting at 0 means that you oftentimes have to take a more macro approach. If you start in the weeds immediately, it will scare you, right? It's going to immediately deter you from wanting to become a more mature organization. I just had a conversation with a customer today where they were talking about all of these great and neat features that they wanted, everything that they wanted to do from an information management perspective. But I'm like, wait, let's take a second and let's focus. What is your primary goal, right? Because you can want all of the bells and whistles, but the moment you have to implement it all, it not only becomes a burden on yourself as an IT admin, but what happens if there's an actual impact to your end users? Then again, productivity becomes a battle against compliance rather than working hand in hand to work towards a proper set of efficiency.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it makes me think of another anecdote exactly along the lines of what you're saying. We deal with a lot of organizations who in the effort to try and achieve agility and collaboration, which you can see there at 7 and 8. We want to be able to collaborate and do so in an agile fashion, and we want to use teams and all of these types of things. A lot of folks enable teams-based workspaces, and they say everyone can create them and we can create them as we need them. And this is a very productive thing that we're doing here. And what will happen 2 years down the line is that those folks will be sitting with 800 teams. They won't know what information is inside of them, don't know how to sunset them, don't know who has access to the information inside of them. And that is then a mess. And that's really what happens when you don't go hang 10, pump the brakes. Let's put in place the right planning, the right structures in order to really enable that agility and that efficiency, which doesn't mean put in a request and 4 weeks later the IT department gives you a team, but rather there's a process which is planned up front so that you can get your team as quickly as you need to, and you can collaborate with it, and you can do all of those great things with very little friction. But the life cycle of that team is managed. We know what information is inside of it. We know whether or not we can share that information externally. All of these good questions that we really need in order to effectively manage these workspaces.
Absolutely.
Okay, next slide, Maggie, please. Okay, so then we put some slides together, and in the interests of time, this is not conclusive. It's just some talking points that we thought we'd like to leave everyone who is attending the webinar with, if they are thinking about how to put into practice what we're talking about, some tangible takeaways, I suppose. And first on the list is design your information landscape. Don't fall into the trap of saying, we'll just create teams and whoever creates the team is responsible for it, and hopefully we'll reach a point where these teams are self-managed. Likewise, from a SharePoint perspective, creating SharePoint sites organically without a real plan behind it, without a structure, without a thought, can really put you in a place where 2 years down the line, you find yourself in a place where you have that SharePoint sprawl or Microsoft Teams sprawl, and everything is kind of all over the place. Instead, what you can do is design your information landscape. Think about the types of teams and sites that you want for different purposes so that you have an area of your corporate intranet or information ecosystem or whatever you want to call it, where folks are able to collaborate as teams of particular type, where projects can be expedited, where communities are able to live their best life and form tribes and all of the good things that are needed in these kinds of informal teams, where folks have a personal space, where you have a demarcated area for extranet type activities where partners and vendors can collaborate with internal resources. And a space where you're doing your records and archiving, whether that is an external system, whether it is a product like AvePoint Cloud Records, or whether it is the native Microsoft 365 record keeping and archiving solutions. And I know, Jay, that AvePoint has a few good products that kind of slot in all over the place here to help create this picture.
Absolutely. Whether it's cloud governance for managing your workspaces and provisioning and lifecycle management, or like you said, records for being able to actually manage the information itself, ensuring that that data stays relevant and that information that is stale gets removed and stored in a proper location from an archiving perspective. But there's a lot of tools that we can help provide that will also kind of give you a simplistic approach to look from a smaller view, right? So that it's not as daunting. And I know the next slides are really going to help illustrate that as well.
Yep. And on that note, Maggie. Okay, so another thing that you can do, and you would have heard us speak about this on previous webinars if you've attended other webinars in this series, is to design your information taxonomies. If you talk to records managers, especially in the federal space, who have dealt with products that are not on Microsoft 365, you know, the open text of the world, etc., these are methodologies that are baked into those professions, and it's expected that you will look at each individual business unit within an organization. And again, talking about the 12% of business critical data, not the entire information ecosystem, and say, what are the types of documents that are important? What does their life cycle look like? What metadata is managed along with them? And this is something that existed in much older versions of SharePoint, but got a really bad name because of the way that SharePoint was dealing with collaboration. And it's something that in the evolution of SharePoint, now in SharePoint Online, is something that is actually being elevated up to a first-class citizen status because of the value of creating these types of hierarchies and really understanding, okay, what are the documents that our finance department works with? What are the documents that our legal department works with? This is a bit of a contrived example, but I'm sure you can see how this could be extrapolated across any kind of organization in any kind of industry. And if you're going to pursue automation, if you're looking at RPA, these types of things, this is something that enables that process, because that's going to be the first question that an automation expert is going to ask you. How do I identify this particular type of purchase order? How do we get the information out of it? How do we store that information? How do we evolve different versions of it? How do we publish it, etc.? The first step to that is design your information taxonomy. And then plan your teams and collaboration workspaces. Looks kind of like the slide before this. The reason that we like to talk about these things in separate discussion points is because in a few years back, you would design those information taxonomies and that would be good enough. But that's not how folks work nowadays. If you look at the way that folks interact on Microsoft Teams, on Slack, these types of team-based technologies, folks expect to be able to create workspaces, bring information into those workspaces, work on it as a team, and that information might go somewhere after that team is destroyed. And as a result of that, it's really important to understand how these team workspaces work and what their life cycle looks like, so that you can start to engineer how the information is ingressed into a team and how it egresses out. A good example of that would be a project-based team, for instance. A project-based team is going to be created when a project has been signed, for instance, or authorized, or there's a budget assigned, whatever the case may be. And those documents that go into that would probably be project type documents from our previous taxonomy. At a point in time, the project will come to an end. And when that project ends, so there's a project closure perhaps, and that acts as a trigger, the documents inside of that may have to have some automation built into them. Some of those documents become records and they go into a records management system, but other documents perhaps are centralized for reuse in future projects. This is how these team workspaces affect the life cycle of these documents. And that's why it's important to design them and understand the types of teams that your organizations use as well. This also allows you to templatize them, that you can say, if we need a departmental team, or if we need a team for a particular type of case, or if we need a team for a project, we can create a team from a template in a much more efficient fashion and bake into that the types of apps that are used, the types of permissions that are required, all that is necessary in order to make that team compliant. And that is where we're talking about the rubber meeting the road from a compliance and productivity perspective.
Yeah, Ryan. And one thing I just like talking about here is the fact that the reality is that as we treat workspaces as something that we're going to leverage on a per project basis, we have to remember that the way that we collaborate with one set of individuals is oftentimes not going to be the same as how we collaborate with other individuals. That's not to say that there aren't similarities, but it does mean we need to keep in mind that if I'm working on a project that is specifically for legal, there's probably going to be a timeline associated with that, right? Specifically, maybe around an RFP or something of that nature. But conversely, let's say I'm working with my IT team, I'm probably going to continue to be collaborating with them every single day for the duration of my entire existence at this company or this organization. Making sure that our collaboration workspaces fit the actual general need along with the information that is housed and stored underneath helps ensure that if there's a time where we need to create another collaboration workspace, maybe we don't need to, right? So that's another reason why we separate out the whole workspace versus information, because the information underneath that collaboration workspace might start to become stale. It might get archived, it might get removed, but that collaboration workspace, its purpose might still be maintained and kept. And in that scenario, we don't actually need to create a new collaboration workspace. We just need to make sure that the information we're continuing to share is up to date and most relevant.
Yes, exactly. And every organization is different. Organizations within industry or within a sector or within state and local or federal agencies may have similarities to them, but ultimately under the covers, they're going to need different types of teams to work with different types of information despite the similarities. And so it's really worthwhile to engineer this stuff so that you can be productive within these new workspace type collaboration environments.
So I'll take this one, Ryan. This is
Yep.
something that I think will start to kind of resonate with folks who really have to deal with governance, right? If you've really been paying attention to what we're talking about when we say collaboration workspaces, being able to engineer a framework that allows you to create the right type of collaboration workspace for each individual type of collaboration that you're doing. So in the example for a department where external sharing is not allowed, maybe this is an internal project, something that might house PII or PCI, we can ensure that the right type of collaboration workspace would be enabled and would be created. That particular workspace, because it has external sharing disabled, means that we're probably only going to want this for around maybe 6 months at the most. All of these requests might have to come through IT because, again, there's data and information here that might be risky if it was shared out externally. Ensuring that the right folks actually still maintain and have access is the recertification process. Making sure that the right members have access maybe on a 3-month or a bi-monthly cadence for the duration of that 6 months. But what happens if we're trying to work on something where we can allow external sharing, right? So we're working with contractors or other external folks. This might not have PII or PCI in it. As a result, these collaboration workspaces, they can last a full year. We're not as concerned with who has access, so therefore we only recertify every 6 months. But these requests, now maybe they come from the department's IT, right? So no longer do we have to go up into the global entity, the global organization. Now we're starting to give smaller folks the ability to actually manage specific types of workspaces as it pertains to specific controls that IT has already put in place, right? And all of this is designed to give you the ability to say, hey, let's not introduce shadow IT, because that's where we start to see compliance meeting and competing against productivity. Instead, if we empower the end users to have the ability to create their own collaboration workspaces with specific controls in mind that IT has already set up, like Ryan was saying, we now ensure that there will not be as much sprawl. But on top of that, we're going to ensure that the right type of information is stored in the right type of collaboration workspace, that it lives for as long as it's supposed to, the right folks have access to it and will continue to have access to it, all while making sure that this can be done very quickly and rapidly without the need to wait for 2, 3, 4 weeks for IT to actually come in and say, we'll create it. Instead, we've already put the policies, the controls in place to say, nope, you as an IT admin or you as a business user or even you as an end user could come in and just request this through a form. So you'll have all of that control right at your fingertips.
Exactly. And I mean, consider not doing this. Consider Department B there is an IT department. It was created organically because anyone in the organization can create a team. At a point in time, someone in the IT department goes, we need this vendor onboarded into our IT department team because we're working very closely with them. And that happens. And the vendor just stays there. Maybe a few years later, the IT department is working on a particular bid for some technology, and that vendor is now likely to respond on that bid, and they've got folks hanging around on this internal team from a few years back, which haven't been cleaned up, probably shouldn't still have access, might not have been given access at the outset if someone had thought their way through it from a policy perspective. But hey, here we are. And that it ultimately not only introduces risk, but it's going to introduce a lot of effort on the IT department's part in order to clean up all that mess.
Absolutely, Ryan.
Another thing worth thinking about is that the best technology in the world is not a silver bullet, and that often what we see, and I'm sure a lot of the folks on the call can probably relate, is that we implement technology and we expect the organization to react to it. But managing information is a culture shift. We've seen that in the way that we've had to train folks to evaluate risk in phishing attacks and emails that they might receive that are attempts to breach security from a cyber perspective. Likewise, folks need to buy into the need to manage information in a not only a practical but in a very organized and diligent way. And so you really want to approach this as a culture shift and think about, what do we do in order to get adoption? How do we identify champions? How do we get advocates? How do we train folks adequately so that this is not daunting, but rather they feel that this is something that they can tackle? How do we effectively communicate the change that we're suggesting in order to get to a place where we have this organizational compliance and governance? What are the standing operating procedures that we need to measure ourselves against? All of these types of things need to form part of a strategy that shifts the organizational culture while the technology strategy and information strategy evolve as well.
Yeah, and this goes full circle back to that slide we were talking about keeping your house clean, right? The idea being that if you yourself start to adopt small changes over time, you'll effectively start to push this throughout your everyday life. And more importantly, you'll become more efficient and effective at everything that you do. And it trickles even into information management because it becomes less of a burden and more of just an everyday routine.
Exactly. And small changes over time are easy for folks to deal with. And if folks are an invested advocate, rather than having the IT system or a new set of methodologies inflicted on them, then they're much more likely to not only adopt it and use it, but perhaps evolve it. Okay, and then finally, manage your risk and cost. A lot of times when we talk to folks, we're talking about where will we find the budget to implement this type of organizational shift. There are places where you can find savings using a good archiving solution, so that instead of paying top dollar for terabytes worth of information that are sitting inside of your Microsoft 365 solution, archive a portion of that and move it into lower cost storage. Part of going through your information and classifying it will help you identify candidates for that. Consider a cloud backup solution. Implement pervasive records management to help you manage your risk and your cost. Implement identity information endpoint and device protection to reduce that risk. And I think, at a point in time, we could defend our network because it was inside a single building, and you were almost, perimeter security was about protecting a single building. I don't think any organization has that liberty anymore. We're not only talking about folks working from home, but working on their devices. We have cloud and on-premise environments, and really it means that we have to have a top shelf game when it comes to security and protection of our information. Consider long-term preservation solutions. So if you have to keep certain documents because they contain health information of individuals, or because they are property deeds, whatever the case may be, for a very long period of time, it doesn't make sense to keep that in a collaboration solution like SharePoint. It may make sense to move that kind of information into a long-term preservation system for record keeping over decades. Engineer or modernize processes like e-discovery, data subject requests. We've dealt with a lot of organizations where the amount of time that is invested into expediting data subject requests and e-discovery cases is a real suck on people's day. It makes people miserable simply because it involves a long process that's cumbersome. There are more and more of them as folks start to, as privacy and data management start to become front and center from a regulatory perspective. And making those efficient can really reduce the amount of admin And the only real way to do that is to go about becoming more organized with your information ecosystem. And then consider physical records management and the possible need to move to electronic record keeping. I know that organizations like NARA are no longer accepting physical records. And so this is a strategy that a lot of organizations may be looking at. And, you know, long term, we probably see that physical records will always be at least a portion of what we have to manage, but certainly a smaller portion than has been historically the case. Okay. And then a slide with another bunch of anecdotes. This is really just talking about what we've been trying to spin into our narrative throughout this presentation, and that is that we all know that when we're organized and when our environments are organized and when we're in a position to be able to work from a place of, I don't want to use the word compliance, but let's say highly organized. When we work from a place of being highly organized, that is when we're at our most productive. And that is the case for organizations as well. It is true that for every minute spent organizing, an hour is earned. That clutter is nothing more than postponed decisions. That the bottom line is, if you do not use it or need it, it's clutter and it needs to go. Lots of things that we know to be true and that we should be applying to our organizational information ecosystems. But the fact that it's daunting, the fact that we don't know where to start, that's what really sidelines us. You can go to the next slide, Maggie. Okay.
All right, and I've got one last poll for y'all. Tell us a little bit about what your biggest roadblocks in productivity are right now. So that is up on your screens. Go ahead and vote. Okay. With most people having voted, 60% say the biggest roadblock is the amount of data they have, and 40% say it's a lack of policies and controls. So, okay, if y'all enjoyed this session and would like to learn a little bit more, maybe get some more personalized advice, we do offer an introductory survey, and this survey will tell us a little bit about your organization, what your unique struggles are, and then we will go over that with you and give you some low-hanging fruit that you can use to go ahead and improve your organization's records and information management strategies. If you're interested in that, feel free to email me. My email's right there, and also there will be a link to schedule a session in the recording that comes out tomorrow. Be looking for that email tomorrow around this time. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you so much, Ryan and Jay.
Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, everybody.